Hello, welcome back to the channel. So out of all the original paths in the game, Destruction has always felt the most disjointed, and it doesn't have as strong of an identity as some of the other DPS paths, like Erudition or Hunt, for a couple of reasons. One, it feels like the devs don't really know what they want to do with the path. The main idea of it seems to be, taking damage and using it for a benefit. And most of the characters, do that. Like Maide and Blade are good examples of this, but some of them just don't really feel like they belong in the path. Like, in Barbaro Lune, why is he Destruction? He has no HP consumption, or anything about wanting to actually get hit. The only real connection he has is like the 3 enemy AoE, but that feels like a super weak connection. Like, it kind of just feels like he's only in Destruction because he just doesn't fit in any of the other DPS paths. Now, I would say that most of the characters do fit, but Destruction really just does feel like the path where they just put characters because they just don't really know where else to put them. Even if you do go by what the actual game itself says Destruction is supposed to be, which is about high damage and survivability, high damage is kind of a thing that they do, but also isn't really unique to Destruction because Hunt and Erudition also do high damage, so that's not really special. And survivability is a thing that they do, so they at least have that going for it, but even then, not all of the characters do that. But even then, on the other side of that, you have characters that do technically do some sort of thing with their HP, or, want to take damage, but then it, barely matters at all. An example of this is Firefly, who does technically have HP consumption in her kit with her base skill, but it barely matters at all because most of the time you're going to be in her ultimate state anyway, where she doesn't even use HP. And even then, her losing HP feels like it just doesn't matter at all. Or even someone like Jing Liu, absorbing so little HP that it feels almost negligible, and it's just like, why even bother at that point, And the main reason I think this is even really a problem is because a lot of the, the characters using their HP or getting hit doesn't really actually feel like a weakness, because Destruction should feel like a sort of risk-reward path, where you kind of toe the line between, using your health as a resource, but also making sure you don't just straight up die. Someone like Casterus, who I know technically is Remembrance, but still, I do think it does do this quite well, because her skill uses a pretty big chunk of the party's HP, so you do need to make sure to be constantly healing so you don't just straight up die. Now, this was kind of mitigated with Hyacine coming up, but I feel like that's more of because Hyacine is just insane rather than a problem with Casterus' kit itself. Now, I do think this is kind of a problem with a lot of the newer characters, not specifically just Destruction, but especially with a lot of the Destruction characters, they're kind of designed to kind of just do everything, and if they do have weaknesses, they kind of just have a million things to where their weaknesses doesn't really matter. Someone like Maide, where he uses his HP, but while he's in the Vendetta state, he can't die, which I guess makes sense for his, lore, but at the same time, it just makes it so he basically just removes a part of the weakness of using the HP. This kind of leads me into the next problem, which is that Destruction has been very good throughout the game's life, but it kind of feels good in a bad way, where it kind of just does what Hunt wants to do, but just way better. And I think it's one of the main reasons why Hunt just hasn't really been that good. For one, Destruction has both good single target and also good AoE damage. Obviously not as good of AoE as something like Erudition, but definitely better than Hunt. And because pretty much every Destruction character has a 3 enemy AoE, which is way better for the current content because of how much more enemies there are. And unless you have insanely high damage like Archer, it is a lot harder for Hunt characters to keep up, because Destruction characters can do comparable damage while also having a lot higher of AoE. On top of that, they just have a lot more synergy with a lot more characters because of them using their HP, and us getting a lot more healers, and they have a lot more synergies with that sort of stuff. And to be honest, I think Destruction has only gotten stronger as time has gone on, especially with characters like Finite now, who are pretty good, However, while they have been pretty good throughout the game's life, it does also feel like Destruction is really susceptible to power creep, even more than some of the other paths are, because all they really bring is damage. Now, obviously, all the DPS paths bring damage, but they at least feel like they have some sort of more, niches that they could fill, Erudition at least has Pure Fiction, where they'll always be useful. and Hunt at least can be pretty good as a boss killer kind of thing. Destruction just isn't as specialized as the other paths, so once we get a character that just does higher numbers, the older ones just don't really bring that much to the table. Now, you can definitely attribute that to like all the paths in the game, because that's kind of just a problem in general, but I feel like it affects Destruction the most, because it is the most like feast or famine path in the game. Like, the characters that are good are really good, but the ones that are bad are really bad. It just feels like they're just not really built that well for longevity, as opposed to maybe some of like the erudition characters. Another problem, kind of similar to some of the other paths, is that their Lycoon selection is kind of terrible. Now, it isn't as bad as something like Hunt, where they only really have like 2 good options and that's kind of it. But so many of them are like either only good on like 1 character or just are straight up bad. Like Indomitable Promise, for example, is only really good on like Shui, since it gives break and crit, and most break characters don't really want crit at all. And like every break character would rather just use Fallen Eon since it gives break and attack. The only real like accessible options that most characters have is like Secret Vow, Fall of an Eon, like I said, maybe Sound Hunt, and that's kind of it. Most of the other options are either like pretty mediocre or just straight up bad. Like Under the Blue Sky, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why did they even make this? It's just straight up a copy of Genius Repose, but with crit rate and for destruction, which just makes it way worse, since this kind of effect is only really good on erudition characters. I don't know, at the end of the day, like, Destruction really does feel like the most experimental paths of all of the original paths, at least. Now remember, it says kind of taken that a bit farther, which, you can feel however you want about that, but still. Now, this doesn't mean that I think Destruction is bad. I do think that Destruction is interesting as a path. Characters like Bida and Phynon are really good, but I just think that it needs a stronger of an identity than it currently has now. Because right now it kind of just feels like they're just throwing everything at the wall and just being like, yeah, sure, whatever, just put them in. Like, even Nihility, which does have a lot of, different things going on, does at least still feel more cohesive, because it's all, focused on debuffs. The only maybe exception is, like, Acheron, but at least she still needs debuffs to get the stacks, and it does at least make sense from a story perspective. But even from a story perspective, it still doesn't really make sense. Like, Saber, why is she Destruction? Now, obviously, I'm not a Fate fan, I haven't watched Fate, but she just doesn't really fit the path at all. And it just feels like they only made her Destruction because the devs just didn't want to have 2 Hunt characters. Now, I do think that this problem is getting better recently. Characters like Maide, I think, are the perfect example of Destruction characters, even if I don't really like the whole, like, not really caring about the weakness thing that they have. And even, like, Phynon, who, like, doesn't lean into the whole getting hit as much, besides maybe his one skill in his form. It does at least make sense for him to be Destruction because of his lore. And I do think he does fit, even if he doesn't link to it as much. But I do still think they need to go further with it, and maybe change some of the older characters to be able to fit into it more. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.